Imagine a vast expanse stretching across deserts, mountains, and endless horizons, where the sun rises over golden sands and sets behind jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of fire and shadow. This was the stage of one of history's most enigmatic networks, the Silk Road. Sit back, relax, and allow yourself to drift along these ancient paths, where merchants, travelers, and explorers once moved like currents in a great river of culture and commerce. Some historians argue the Silk Road was not a single road at all, but a sprawling, intertwined web of routes connecting the heart of China to the far reaches of the Mediterranean. Others suggest it was as much a conduit for ideas, religions, and art as it was for silk, spices, and precious metals. Imagine the sounds echoing through ancient caravanserais, the jingle of coins, the low murmur of traders negotiating, the distant neighing of camels, the crunch of sand under countless feet. Scholars have traced the movement of manuscripts and rare artifacts, hinting at exchanges that went far beyond mere goods. The deserts held secrets of lost cities, while towering mountains challenged travelers with treacherous passes and sudden storms, leaving behind tales of courage, survival, and sometimes complete disappearance. The Silk Road was more than commerce. It was an intricate network of human ambition, curiosity, and connection, spanning cultures that often never met, yet left traces that still resonate today. Some researchers believe that the very survival of certain artistic techniques, culinary traditions, and religious practices can be traced along these ancient veins, preserved in remote monasteries, bustling city markets, and the patterns woven into fabric. As we begin this journey, picture a caravan moving slowly under a moonlit sky, lanterns flickering like distant stars, and wonder at what conversations, deals, and dreams passed between those travelers long before our time. And yet, even as we map the roads and catalogue the treasures, so much remains unknown. What exactly vanished with the sands of time? Which cities once thrived only to be erased? From one mystery to the next, the Silk Road beckons us to follow its shadowy paths, revealing stories that challenge our understanding of history and leave us questioning how much of the world's ancient connectivity still lies hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. As we move deeper into the story of the Silk Road, picture the first stirrings of trade that transformed isolated settlements into bustling hubs of exchange. From the arid plains of Central Asia to the fertile valleys along the Yellow River, goods began to flow: silk from China, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, spices from India, and glassware from the Mediterranean. Each item carried more than material value. It bore stories, techniques, and cultural imprints that would ripple across continents. Imagine a merchant unfolding a length of shimmering silk, the fabric catching sunlight like liquid gold, while a scholar unrolls a fragile scroll filled with foreign characters, attempting to decipher the knowledge of distant lands. Some researchers suggest that these exchanges laid the groundwork for the first true globalization. Centuries before modern communication and transport, caravans traversed deserts under the blazing sun, braving sandstorms and thieves, while mountain passes demanded courage and resilience, the wind howling like an ancient warning through jagged cliffs. Others propose that the Silk Road was as much a spiritual journey as a commercial one, with Buddhist monks, Zoroastrian priests, and Christian missionaries traveling alongside traders, carrying beliefs that would shape civilizations far from their origins. You can almost hear the distant clang of a blacksmith in a caravanserai, forging tools that will be traded at the next market. the aroma of spices mingling with dust and sweat in a swirl of human activity. The diversity of languages and customs created a vibrant tapestry of interaction, yet also left behind gaps in our understanding, fragments of histories that were lost, destroyed, or never recorded. Some cities flourished briefly and vanished, leaving only ruins, while others became legendary crossroads, where art, music, cuisine, and ideas fused into entirely new forms. The Silk Road was not a static highway. It was a living, breathing network that evolved with each caravan, each negotiation, and each traveler who dared to cross its treacherous expanses. As night falls over the ancient route, lanterns flicker in caravan camps, fires crackle, and the shadows of the mountains stretch long and mysterious. What secrets did the desert winds carry away? Which voices and stories will never reach us, lost to time? From one mystery to the next, the Silk Road invites us to peer into the past, to sense the pulse of civilizations connected by invisible threads of curiosity, commerce, and wonder. Next, we move to the heart of the Silk Road's cultural and intellectual exchanges, where ideas traveled as freely as silk and silver. Picture a dusty market in Samarkand, the air thick with the scent of saffron, roasted nuts, and distant smoke from caravan fires. Here merchants not only bartered goods, but also languages, stories, and philosophies, each encounter leaving subtle marks on the people and places involved. Some researchers believe that mathematical concepts, astronomical observations, and medical knowledge were carried along these routes, traveling hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles before being adapted and expanded in distant lands. Others suggest that the mixing of artistic traditions, Persian motifs merging with Chinese brushwork, or Indian sculptures influencing Central Asian monasteries created entirely new aesthetic forms that would inspire generations. Imagine a Buddhist monk meticulously copying a sutra in a dimly lit temple, the paper delicate, the ink fragrant, while outside traders discuss prices, currencies, and routes with the same intensity and precision. It was a network that relied on trust, reputation, and an understanding of human connection, often transcending political boundaries and tribal conflicts. Yet, for all the grandeur of trade and culture, the Silk Road was also a place of danger. Bandits, harsh climates, and political unrest could halt progress, leaving caravans stranded in deserts or mountain passes. The only sounds, the mournful cry of the wind and the faint clinking of metal from abandoned packs. Some cities, like Kashgar, became legendary crossroads where East met West in ways that reshaped local traditions, cuisine, and even social hierarchies. Others vanished almost without a trace, leaving behind only fragments of inscriptions or scattered coins hinting at once thriving civilizations. The legacy of these exchanges is still visible today. Textiles, spices, architectural styles, and musical instruments all bear silent testimony to a world long gone but never truly forgotten. As the sun sets over the rolling dunes and jagged peaks, the Silk Road seems to whisper its secrets to those patient enough to listen. Which innovations traveled hundreds of miles only to vanish in obscurity? Which encounters forever changed the course of art, science, and belief? The story of the Silk Road reminds us that even in the harshest landscapes, human curiosity and creativity can leave echoes that survive millennia, waiting for those willing to trace the paths of shadowed caravans and forgotten cities. As we continue along the Silk Road, imagine the rhythm of camel hooves striking the hard-packed earth, a sound that once marked the heartbeat of an entire network stretching across continents. Here, trade was not just material, it was a conduit for ideas, faiths, and technologies that would ripple through civilizations. Some scholars suggest that the transmission of papermaking techniques from China to the Islamic world fundamentally altered literacy, administration, and record-keeping across vast regions, while others argue that innovations in metallurgy, textiles, and even musical instruments moved along the same routes with less fanfare but equal impact. The roads themselves were feats of human ingenuity, winding through treacherous deserts, carved into cliffsides, or bridging swollen rivers with wooden or stone constructions that required immense labor and coordination. Along these paths, travelers faced scorching days and freezing nights, their journeys measured in months rather than hours, with caravanserais offering brief relief rough stone shelters where weary merchants and monks exchanged news, tales, and sometimes deadly diseases. Yet, it was precisely these interactions that forged unexpected connections. A Persian astronomer might share celestial calculations with a Chinese scholar. A Buddhist pilgrim might encounter Islamic astronomers mapping the stars, and all the while, local markets thrived on the circulation of spices, silks, and silver coins that told stories of faraway lands. Some argue that these encounters sowed the seeds of globalization centuries before the term existed, a subtle weaving of human experiences that transcended borders. Others suggest the Silk Road was equally a battlefield of ideas, where competing empires, religions, and cultures negotiated dominance through commerce as much as through conquest. Look closely at the remnants of ancient cities like Turfan or Dunhuang, and you can see layers of history etched into murals, inscriptions, and manuscripts, the fingerprints of traders, monks, and artisans whose paths intersected in unpredictable ways. Even the deserts, often imagined as empty voids, were living archives, their dunes shifting yet preserving the relics of caravans long gone. From the scent of spices still lingering in narrow streets to the intricate patterns on a woven tapestry, the echoes of exchange continued to speak. What was the cost of this relentless movement of goods and ideas? Which stories were lost to time, and which have shaped the world we live in today? The Silk Road teaches us that every journey carries more than cargo, carries fragments of human ambition, creativity, and the restless desire to connect across unimaginable distances. Next we move to the spiritual heartbeat of the Silk Road, a thread as vital as the caravans themselves, weaving faiths, philosophies, and sacred practices across deserts and mountains. Picture the serene courtyards of Buddhist monasteries, tucked into cliff faces, the scent of incense mingling with the dry desert air. Frescoes depicting stories of compassion and enlightenment, faded yet resilient after centuries of wind and sand. Some researchers believe these monastic centers were more than religious havens. They were libraries, observatories, and schools where knowledge from distant lands converged. A quiet hub of intellectual exchange hidden behind prayer halls and meditation rooms. Elsewhere, Islamic institutions flourished, with scholars translating texts, debating theology, and recording histories that would influence generations far beyond the region. Along the roads, Zoroastrian fire temples, Christian chapels, and Taoist shrines stood side by side with marketplaces, their bells, chants, and prayers blending into the constant hum of trade and travel. Travelers often carried relics, scrolls, and sacred objects as much as spices or silk, embedding their faith into every footstep across mountains and deserts. Some suggest that these spiritual journeys were as transformative as the commercial ones, shaping identities and forging communities that transcended political boundaries. Others argue that religion was a subtle form of diplomacy, a tool to build trust, establish safe passage, or negotiate alliances with distant rulers. Imagine a weary merchant pausing to offer a prayer at a shrine, feeling the presence of countless travelers who had come before, each step a silent testament to faith and resilience. The interplay of art and devotion created a tapestry of human expression. Murals depicting Indian deities, Persian motifs, and Central Asian landscapes, all coexisting in the same sacred space. From one monastery to the next, you can trace the diffusion of styles, techniques, and iconography, hinting at a network of minds and hearts connected over unimaginable distances. Yet, much of this history is fragile, threatened by centuries of neglect, conquest, and climate, leaving only whispers in manuscripts and ruins. How did these spiritual exchanges influence the moral and cultural fabric of the Silk Road civilizations, and which teachings survived to ripple into our modern world, still shaping the ways we perceive connection, tolerance, and the divine? As we step further into these stories, we begin to see the Silk Road not merely as a path of commerce, but as a corridor of human belief, aspiration, and the relentless pursuit of understanding across the vast expanse of Eurasia. From spiritual crossroads, we now drift into the realm of everyday life along the Silk Road, where the hum of commerce intertwined with the rhythms of human survival, and where the ordinary became extraordinary through movement, adaptation, and exchange. Imagine narrow, sun-baked streets of ancient caravanserais, lined with wooden stalls and clay ovens, the aroma of roasted nuts, dried fruits, and exotic spices mingling with the dust of countless footsteps. Merchants shouted their wares in a chorus of dozens of languages: Persian, Chinese, Sogdian, Arabic, while travelers, nomads, and locals navigated a delicate dance of trade, negotiation, and trust. Some researchers suggest that these bustling hubs were more than markets. They were living laboratories of cultural fusion, where culinary techniques, textile patterns, and even medicinal remedies spread silently from one hand to another, one tongue to another. The click of coins, the creak of camel saddles, the whispered haggling, these sounds formed an oral tapestry that connected civilizations in a way no map could fully capture. Imagine a merchant from Kashgar sharing tea with a trader from Samarkand, swapping stories of distant mountains and rivers, exchanging not only goods but ideas, superstitions, and songs. Others argue that these daily interactions were the subtle glue of diplomacy, a grassroots network of relationships that underpinned political alliances and economic stability across vast distances. Caravans became moving communities, carrying not only silk and spices, but the very essence of cross-cultural adaptation: clothing woven with hybrid motifs, musical instruments combining string and percussion traditions from multiple regions, and even recipes that would evolve into the fusion cuisines we savor today. The Silk Road was a living classroom, a place where young apprentices learned not just the art of trade, but the art of survival, negotiation, and respect for diversity. And yet, for all this vibrancy, danger lurked in the deserts and mountains. Bandits, harsh weather, and treacherous terrain reminded every traveler that this interconnected world came at a steep price. Each exchange, each step, each breath taken along these routes was a negotiation with fortune, a silent pact between human ambition and the natural world. How did the rhythms of daily life shaped the larger story of the Silk Road, and which hidden patterns of connection have vanished, leaving only traces in manuscripts and ruins. As night falls over these ancient pathways, we hear the echoes of human endeavor stretching across centuries, beckoning us deeper into the mystery of what it truly meant to live along the arteries of the ancient world. Next, we move from the bustling caravanserais to the grand, silent monuments that mark the passage of empires along the Silk Road, structures that seem to hold secrets in their stones and shadows, whispering stories to those who dare to listen. Picture towering city walls of Xi'an, weathered but resolute, their rough-hewn bricks absorbing centuries of wind, sand, and rain, standing as silent witnesses to the flow of goods, ideas, and armies. Some researchers believe that these fortifications were more than defense mechanisms. They were statements of power and permanence, signals to travelers and traders that they had entered lands where order and authority prevailed. Yet mystery lingered in every alley and side street. Others suggest that the placement of these cities and fortresses was guided not just by strategy, but by ancient knowledge of trade winds, water sources, and the patterns of human movement. A network invisible to modern eyes, but critical for the survival of merchants and armies alike. Within these walls, markets thrived, temples rose, and scholars wrote texts that would later be transported along the very routes they studied, carrying knowledge across deserts and mountains. Imagine the clatter of ink brushes on paper, the faint scent of parchment, the careful cataloguing of astronomical observations, medical remedies, and religious teachings, all destined to be shared, copied, and transformed by countless hands along the Silk Road. Meanwhile, mausoleums and stupas dotted the landscape, each one a monument to faith, wealth, or ambition. Some built with gold leaf glinting in the harsh sun, others carved from stone so intricately that the eye cannot trace every line, every hidden motif. Archaeologists today carefully brush away centuries of dust to reveal faded murals, ancient coins, and inscriptions in languages long dormant, offering tantalizing hints of the lives that intersected at these crossroads. What we can sense is that these monumental spaces were more than physical. They were symbolic, spiritual, and practical nodes of human connection. Places where culture was both preserved and transformed. And yet, for all the knowledge they contained, much remains elusive. Who exactly walked these streets? What conversations were had? What ideas perished before they could take root elsewhere? The silence of the ruins poses questions louder than words ever could, drawing us into a contemplation of human ambition, resilience, and the unseen currents that carried civilization across continents. From one silent city to the next, the story of the Silk Road continues to unfold, leaving us to wonder how these monumental spaces shaped not only history, but the imagination of generations to come. From the monumental cities, we now drift along the winding desert paths where caravans once creaked under the weight of silks, spices, and stories, their wooden wheels leaving grooves in sand that have long since been smoothed by wind, yet whisper faintly of journeys past. Picture the sun hanging low over the Gobi or the Taklamakan, casting elongated shadows over camel trains, each animal swaying rhythmically, a living metronome marking time across a landscape both beautiful and unforgiving. Some historians suggest that these desert routes were far more than conduits of trade. They were corridors of cultural osmosis, where merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers exchanged languages, beliefs, and knowledge as casually as they exchanged goods. Others propose that the deserts themselves acted as guardians of secrets, their shifting dunes hiding evidence of vanished settlements, lost treasures, and untold stories, preserved only in the imagination of those who dare to wander. Along these routes, oasis towns appeared like green mirages, their wells and palm groves providing respite from the endless sands, spaces where ideas were traded as urgently as silk or saffron. Merchants would gather in shaded courtyards, the air thick with the aroma of roasting nuts and the chatter of multiple tongues, recounting tales from distant lands while their ledgers recorded sums of gold and barter agreements. The very rocks and cliffs lining the paths bore inscriptions, prayers, and graffiti left by travelers from centuries ago, cryptic echoes of devotion, hope, or simple boredom on long journeys. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments of manuscripts, coins, and ceramics buried beneath the sands, hinting at connections that spanned continents, revealing that even in isolation, no Silk Road traveler truly moved alone. The wind carries more than sand here. It carries memory, soundless yet palpable, and in this emptiness, one can almost hear the laughter, arguments, and footsteps of countless travelers long gone. And yet, despite the traces of human activity, the desert resists full comprehension, its vastness preserving both life and legend, allowing stories to slip between the grains of time. So, as we follow these caravan trails, we are reminded that the Silk Road was not just a map of trade, but a web of human experience, of courage and desperation, of connection and solitude. Each step into the dunes invites the question, what truths remain hidden beneath this ever-shifting expanse, and what voices of the past are still whispering to those patient enough to listen? Next, we move from the deserts to the towering mountains that formed both barriers and gateways along the Silk Road, where jagged peaks rise like ancient sentinels, their snow-capped summits glinting in the harsh sunlight, and valleys conceal winding passes that only the most daring or desperate travelers would attempt. Imagine the sound of wind howling through narrow gorges, the occasional crack of ice or rock, and the muffled shuffle of boots on gravel each step, a negotiation with nature itself. Some scholars believe that these high passes were as much a test of human endurance as they were trade routes, where caravans risked avalanches, frostbite, and altitude sickness for access to goods and knowledge that could shift the balance of wealth and power in distant lands. Others suggest that the mountains acted as natural laboratories, preserving flora, fauna, and even cultural artifacts in isolation, allowing travelers to glimpse unique worlds that would vanish beyond the next ridge. The mountain settlements that did emerge were small, resilient communities, where stone and timber structures hugged cliffsides and terraces, their residents mastering irrigation channels and terraced fields in defiance of gravity and scarcity. Here, one could find markets for yak wool, salt, medicinal herbs, and rare manuscripts. A convergence of survival and commerce, ingenuity and ritual. Monasteries perched on cliffs provided refuge and spiritual guidance, their bells ringing across valleys to mark time and offer comfort to weary travelers. Some researchers note that the sounds, scents, and rhythms of mountain life infused the Silk Road experience with a sense of sacredness, as if every trade and transaction was accompanied by invisible guardians watching from the heights. In these passes, cultural exchange was not limited to material goods. Oral traditions, musical motifs, and artistic techniques traversed the paths alongside merchants, leaving subtle traces in local dialects and decorative styles. Yet, the mountains also hold mysteries that remain stubbornly hidden, from rock carvings whose meanings have faded with the centuries, to tombs tucked away in inaccessible crags, containing relics of lives that intersected briefly with the Silk Road. Every footstep through these high corridors seems to echo with choices, made long ago decisions to press onward or turn back, to trust strangers or guard secrets, to embrace the unknown. And as we peer into these soaring landscapes, we cannot help but wonder how many stories were lost to the cold and wind, and which voices from the past are still waiting, just beyond our sight, to reveal their secrets. From one mountain mystery, we descend into the sprawling deserts that stretched across Central Asia, where sand dunes ripple like frozen waves and the sun casts a relentless glare over vast plains that seem to go on forever. Sit back and imagine the whisper of wind over the sand, the creaking of leather on camel saddles, the distant call of a lone bird navigating a sky that feels impossibly wide and empty. These deserts, once thought to be insurmountable barriers, became arteries of connection, guiding traders along routes dictated by scarce water sources and the subtle patterns of the stars. Some historians argue that desert oases functioned as lifelines, tiny pockets of civilization where merchants could rest, resupply, and exchange news, gossip, and goods. Others suggest that the isolation of these stops encouraged a culture of secrecy, with coded messages and hidden caches protecting treasures from both natural and human threats. Caravans moved like shadows across the dunes, laden with silk, spices, precious metals, and ideas, their presence leaving barely a trace on the endless sand. Yet each journey shaped economies, cultures, and even political alliances. Imagine the sensation of walking among these dunes at dusk, when the temperature drops and shadows stretch long and thin, creating landscapes that feel both enchanting and menacing, as if the desert itself were a living entity, observing every traveler's decision. Archaeological discoveries hint at lost cities buried beneath the sand, their ruins whispering of bustling markets, ceremonial spaces, and domestic life now erased by wind and time. Some researchers propose that these cities were once hubs of intellectual and artistic exchange, producing manuscripts, instruments, and artworks that traveled the Silk Road and influenced distant civilizations. Others suggest that the harshness of the desert forced innovations in navigation, logistics, and survival that underpin the very possibility of long-distance trade in antiquity. Beyond the physical challenges, the desert demanded adaptability, resilience, and a deep understanding of the natural world, qualities that became intertwined with the identities of the merchants, scholars, and pilgrims who traversed it. And as night falls, when the moon rises over the dunes and stars blaze with clarity unknown in crowded cities, the desert seems to hum with echoes of countless footsteps, whispered conversations, and lost stories. A reminder that even in the most inhospitable places, human ambition and curiosity find a way to endure. One cannot help but wonder what treasures, knowledge, or secrets remain buried beneath these shifting sands, waiting for the next traveler bold enough, perhaps unlucky enough, to stumble upon them. From the arid expanse of the deserts, we move to the imposing mountain passes that carved their way through Central Asia like natural fortresses, jagged ridges and narrow paths that challenged even the most experienced travelers, their sheer cliffs and hidden valleys offering both refuge and peril. Imagine standing at the edge of a precipice, the wind howling in your ears, the scent of pine and stone mingling with the faint aroma of distant fires, and the sound of pack animals clattering along paths barely wide enough to hold them. These high-altitude routes were more than physical obstacles. They were arenas where cultures collided, mingled, and sometimes clashed. Caravans crossing these passes carried not just goods but stories, languages, and beliefs, seeds of exchange that would take root far beyond the mountains. Some scholars argue that the difficulty of these routes created strong bonds among travelers, communities that relied on trust and shared knowledge to survive. Others suggest that the very isolation of certain passes fostered unique cultural enclaves, with customs and artistic styles that never left the mountains themselves. Legends speak of hidden monasteries tucked into cliffs, where monks preserved ancient manuscripts, performed rituals, and offered sanctuary to weary travelers, their chants echoing down the valleys like a bridge between the mortal and the divine. The mountains also shaped trade itself. Routes were dictated by rockfalls and sudden storms, forcing merchants to become keen observers of nature, reading clouds, snow patterns, and animal behavior as guides through a perilous environment. Archaeological finds in these highland stools, coins, fragments of textiles, and remnants of meals long consumed reveal glimpses of lives lived in constant negotiation with the unforgiving landscape. Some researchers suggest that these passes acted as conduits for not only material goods, but technological innovations, medicinal knowledge, and even military strategies. Others emphasize the spiritual dimension, arguing that the mountains inspired art, philosophy, and religious thought that radiated along the Silk Road. Picture a caravan cresting a ridge at sunrise, the first light illuminating snow-capped peaks and casting deep shadows into valleys. The air thin and crisp, each breath a reminder of human fragility and endurance. And as travelers descended into the next valley, carrying the weight of goods and ideas alike, one is left to ponder: how many lives were changed, how many connections formed, and how many secrets of the Silk Road remain etched into these cliffs, waiting for those willing to climb and listen. Next, we move from the rugged heights of the mountains to the sprawling deserts that stretched across Central Asia. Vast seas of sand and stone where the horizon seems to dissolve into shimmering heat waves, and silence reigns with a presence that is almost tangible, pressing against the ears and the mind. The deserts of the Silk Road were no mere obstacles. They were living, breathing entities, shaping the pace, the routes, and even the fate of travelers. Imagine walking beside a caravan under a relentless sun, the grains of sand biting at your skin, the distant dunes shifting like restless giants, each step a negotiation with the unforgiving landscape. Some travelers spoke of mirages, illusions born of thirst and heat, where oasis pools appeared and vanished, and shadows of distant cities flickered across the sand like ghosts of commerce long past. Others tell stories of sudden storms, violent and blinding, where sand whipped through the air with the force of 1,000 knives, forcing caravans to huddle in makeshift shelters, their animals trembling, and goods buried beneath hurriedly constructed dunes. Yet these deserts were also places of revelation, spaces where the mind could wander as freely as the wind, and where merchants and pilgrims recorded histories, sketched maps, and inscribed tales onto the very earth they crossed. Archaeological discoveries reveal hidden wells, fragments of pottery, coins, and textiles, traces of fleeting settlements that hint at the transient yet vibrant life that threaded these arid expanses. Some scholars argue that the desert enforced a discipline and rhythm that defined the Silk Road itself, regulating trade and interaction. Others suggest it inspired artistic and religious expression, as human imagination sought to tame the vast emptiness through stories, symbols, and ritual. The desert was also a crossroads for ideas, not just commodities, where languages mingled, beliefs merged, and travelers shared knowledge of distant lands. Picture the night sky over the desert, an infinite canopy of stars mirrored by pale sands, where the faint murmur of a caravan's journey becomes almost hypnotic, blending with the whispers of ancient traders, their paths etched invisibly across time. And as the sun dips below the dunes, leaving the desert in a silver hush, one is left to wonder what secrets remain buried beneath the shifting sands, and how many of the Silk Road's silent witnesses still guard the stories of exchange, adventure, and survival that shaped civilizations. From the harsh deserts, we shift our gaze to the bustling oases, those miraculous pockets of life that punctuated the arid expanse like green jewels, where water shimmered beneath date palms and the air carried the scent of spices, incense, and the distant hum of commerce. These oases were more than mere resting points. They were living, breathing microcosms of the Silk Road, where cultures collided and fused, where languages intertwined in the cadence of trade, and where merchants, pilgrims, and emissaries left traces of their passage in markets, temples, and caravans. Imagine walking through a narrow street lined with stalls, the ground dusty but worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, the air thick with the aroma of dried fruits, roasted grains, and exotic perfumes, the chatter of bargaining echoing against walls decorated with faded murals and intricate mosaics. Some researchers suggest that these oases functioned as informal universities of culture, where knowledge, religion, and artistry traveled as readily as silk and silver. Others propose that their very survival depended on a delicate balance of diplomacy, resource management, and shared customs among the diverse communities that called them home. Here, Buddhist monks might exchange sacred texts with Muslim scholars. Artists might copy and adapt motifs from distant lands, and merchants would meticulously record debts, inventories, and tales of faraway cities. Archaeological digs in places like Samarkand and Kashgar reveal remnants of granaries, stables, and workshops, their scale and organization hinting at a sophisticated understanding of both economics and human cooperation. The oases were also stages for intrigue and strategy, where caravans navigated alliances, negotiated safe passage through desert stretches, and occasionally encountered bandits whose shadows lurked in the distance. Travelers wrote of the nights spent under lantern-lit canopies, where stories were shared, songs were sung in unfamiliar tongues, and maps were sketched in the sand, a fleeting record of the journeys that crisscrossed the Eurasian continent. And yet, for all their vibrancy, these oases held an ephemeral quality. They existed in tension with the surrounding desert, fragile yet resilient, transient yet enduring, carrying the weight of centuries in their well-trodden paths. As twilight falls and the calls to prayer mingle with the murmurs of evening trade, one cannot help but wonder how many tales of negotiation, discovery, and hidden knowledge vanished here without record, and which secrets of the Silk Road still whisper beneath the palms and within the cool shadows of these ancient sanctuaries. Next we move to the grand arteries of the Silk Road, the vast desert and mountain routes that stretched across continents, where the wind carried sand like whispers of forgotten travelers, and the sun painted the dunes in shifting golds and reds, a reminder of both beauty and peril. Imagine a caravan slowly threading its way through the Taklamakan, camels creaking under the weight of silks, ceramics, and spices, their hooves sinking into the powdery earth, each step measured and deliberate. as travelers consulted maps drawn on fragile parchment, aware that one wrong turn could lead to weeks lost in isolation. Some historians argue that these desert crossings were more than physical challenges. They were tests of human resilience and ingenuity, where survival demanded not only careful planning but an understanding of subtle signals, the flight patterns of birds, the texture of the sand, the faint glimmer of water far ahead. Others suggest that the mountains, from the Pamirs to the Tian, served as both barriers and protectors, their jagged peaks hiding the secret trails that only experienced guides could navigate, while snow and ice transformed familiar paths into labyrinths of danger and discovery. Caravans relied on a network of way stations, hidden wells, and small settlements, often built into cliffs or nestled in valleys, where weary travelers could replenish supplies, tend to the animals, and exchange news from distant cities. These remote stops were lifelines, places where merchants might hear rumors of political upheaval, shifting alliances, or new trade opportunities, while their goods, precious silk, rare metals, fragrant oils, changed hands under the watchful eyes of local authorities. The movement along these routes was slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, punctuated by the rhythms of camel bells and the whispered prayers of those hoping for safe passage. Some researchers believe that these grueling journeys forged connections not only between cities but between cultures, encouraging a subtle but persistent exchange of ideas, technologies, and art forms that would ripple across continents for centuries. And yet, the vastness of these landscapes ensured that many stories remain buried beneath sand and stone, lost to the elements, awaiting discovery by those patient enough to trace the ancient tracks. As night falls over the dunes and mountains, the caravan's flickering lanterns appear as tiny constellations against the darkness, reminding us that for every known story of the Silk Road, countless others vanish into the infinite horizon, leaving only the faintest trace of human ambition and curiosity. From one mystery to the next, we turn our attention to the bustling cities that sprang up along the Silk Road, oases of life where dust-laden travelers were met with the clatter of merchant stalls, the scent of exotic spices, and the swirl of languages from every corner of Eurasia, a cacophony of commerce and culture that echoed through narrow alleyways and open markets alike. Picture the streets of Samarkand or Kashgar, where the sunlight dances off glazed tiles in intricate geometric patterns, reflecting onto the faces of merchants haggling over silks dyed in crimson and sapphire, carpets woven with stories of distant lands, and jade trinkets polished smooth by generations of hands. Scholars debate the extent to which these cities were melting pots of innovation versus transient stops for trade. Some suggest that the constant movement of people fostered unprecedented creativity, inspiring artisans to blend motifs, techniques, and ideas from cultures thousands of miles apart. Others argue that the cities were as fragile as they were vibrant, vulnerable to conquest, disease, and natural disasters, with streets that could shift overnight from prosperity to silence. In these urban centers, religious diversity flourished. Buddhist stupas rose alongside Islamic madrasas. Zoroastrian temples stood near Taoist shrines, and synagogues quietly maintained their rituals, all coexisting in a delicate balance. The air was thick with incense, the clamor of camel caravans, the calls of merchants, and the hum of scholars debating philosophy or mathematics, a living testament to the cultural layering that defined the Silk Road. It was here, amid the labyrinthine bazaars and sun-drenched courtyards, that new technologies spread paper from China, numerals from India, and textile techniques from Persia carried not only in goods but in the minds of those who traded, taught, and traveled. Some researchers believe that the vibrancy of these cities provided the ideal conditions for knowledge to flourish, incubating ideas that would later reshape societies far beyond Central Asia. Others note that much of this vibrancy was precarious, dependent on political stability, water access, and the steady rhythm of trade routes that could shift with the whims of empire. And yet, even when abandoned or destroyed, traces remain. Crumbling walls, faded frescoes, fragments of manuscripts, whispers of conversations long silenced, offering tantalizing clues about lives once intertwined with the pulse of a world connected by roads of silk, spice, and dreams. The cities themselves, though ancient and silent now, still hum with echoes of countless journeys, leaving us to wonder what stories remain hidden beneath their stones and dust, waiting for the next curious traveler to uncover them. Next, we move to the merchants and caravans that threaded their way across deserts, mountains, and steppe, their journeys measured not in miles but in the shifting patterns of weather, the rise and fall of political powers, and the delicate balance between risk and reward. Imagine a caravan of camels, each laden with bolts of silk, jars of precious oils, or rare minerals, plodding steadily across endless dunes while the wind carries the scent of distant lands, the harsh crunch of sand beneath hooves marking a rhythm that has echoed for centuries. These traders were not mere transporters of goods. They were conduits of culture, religion, and knowledge, moving ideas as fluidly as they moved merchandise. Some researchers believe that the reputation of certain merchants, their ability to navigate both geography and diplomacy, determined the flow of entire networks of trade, while others suggest that the very anonymity of these travelers allowed innovations to spread without the constraints of politics or borders. Along the Silk Road, alliances were forged in desert camps, deals struck over firelight, and trust built slowly, layer upon layer, across languages and customs. Tales abound of caravans, braving bandits, sudden storms, and treacherous mountain passes, their survival dependent on skill, luck, and sometimes the guidance of local knowledge passed down through generations. These journeys could take months or even years, yet each step carried the potential for transformative encounters. A scholar sharing astronomical calculations with a wandering monk, a musician exchanging melodies with a traveling minstrel, or a merchant learning of a new textile technique from a distant city. The movement of people created patterns of connection that went beyond trade, weaving a complex web of interdependence that historians now trace through coins, manuscripts, and fragmented artifacts. Some suggest that without these constant human flows, the Silk Road would have remained a series of isolated routes, while others argue that the sheer scale of exchange stretching from the Mediterranean to the edges of China inevitably created networks of influence whose echoes are still visible in modern art, cuisine, and language, as we picture the caravans winding through canyons, across high passes dusted with snow, and under skies painted with dawn and dusk. It becomes clear that each journey was a story unto itself, a microcosm of human resilience, curiosity, and ambition. And yet, for every caravan that reached its destination, countless others vanished into the vastness of desert and mountain, leaving only traces, footprints, and whispers of journeys that history may never fully recount, inviting us to imagine the unseen paths and untold encounters of those who once traveled the Silk Road, from the arduous journeys of merchants. We turn to the cities that blossomed along the Silk Road, each a nexus of commerce, culture, and intrigue, where narrow streets echoed with the chatter of traders, the clatter of carts, and the distant hum of prayers from temples and mosques. Picture Samarkand, Bukhara, or Kashgar at the height of their prosperity, walls adorned with intricate tilework, markets spilling with spices, silk, and ceramics, and fountains murmuring secrets to those who paused to listen. Scholars suggest that these cities functioned as living laboratories of cultural synthesis, where artisans borrowed motifs from distant lands, where culinary traditions intertwined, and where languages collided in a chaotic, harmonious symphony. Some researchers believe that the architecture alone tells stories of influence and adaptation. Minarets inspired by Persian designs, domes recalling Chinese craftsmanship, and courtyards echoing steppe nomad sensibilities. Within the bustling bazaars, deals were struck not only with coins but with gestures, nods, and the silent understanding that trust was currency as valuable as gold. The diversity of these urban centers fostered innovation. Astronomers exchanged charts, physicians shared treatments, and poets drew inspiration from travelers' tales, crafting verses that traveled as far as the goods themselves. Yet the cities were also fragile, vulnerable to conquest, fire, or plague, each event leaving traces of human ambition and mortality etched into stone and memory. The streets that once thrummed with life now offer archaeologists and historians tantalizing glimpses of a world both familiar and alien, where the mundane and the extraordinary coexisted. Some suggest that the Silk Road cities functioned as early cosmopolitan hubs, incubators of ideas that shaped civilizations far beyond their borders, while others argue that their true significance lies in their role as intermediaries, bridging disparate worlds and facilitating exchange on an unprecedented scale. As we wander mentally through these ancient streets, we can almost hear the clinking of coins, smell the exotic perfumes, taste the unfamiliar spices, and sense the tension between opportunity and danger that defined daily life. The cities were living embodiments of connection and contrast, of cooperation and competition, and their stories remind us that the Silk Road was not merely a route of trade, but a stage on which human ingenuity, desire, and curiosity played out over centuries. And yet, for all their grandeur and vibrancy, these cities hold mysteries, hidden chambers, forgotten records, and silent witnesses that whisper of histories still waiting to be uncovered, inviting us to question what treasures of knowledge might lie buried beneath the sands of time. Next, we move from the cities themselves to the lives of the people who traversed the Silk Road, the merchants, pilgrims, and wanderers whose footsteps traced invisible lines across deserts, mountains, and rivers, leaving behind traces of human endeavor that survive in fragments of manuscripts, caravanserai ruins, and oral traditions. Imagine a caravan winding through the Taklamakan desert, camels laden with silk, spices, and precious metals, the sun baking the sand into a shimmering haze, and the wind carrying both hope and danger in equal measure. Travelers relied on detailed maps, local guides, and ancient knowledge passed down through generations. Yet uncertainty remained constant. Sudden storms, bandit attacks, or the simple cruelty of thirst could change the fate of a journey in hours. Some historians argue that the psychology of these travelers shaped the Silk Road as much as geography did, suggesting that resilience, adaptability, and cross-cultural sensitivity were as vital as the goods they transported. Others focus on the social networks formed along the way, where familial ties, shared religion, or professional guilds created a web of support and obligation stretching across continents. Merchants were not mere sellers of goods, but carriers of culture, ideas, and technology. Paper and printing techniques moved westward, while glass-making skills traveled east, each innovation reshaping distant societies. Pilgrims brought spiritual practices, manuscripts, and artistic motifs, contributing to the diffusion of religious and philosophical thought. Even the music of the Rhoda medley of instruments, chants, and languages served as a subtle thread of cultural continuity, uniting disparate regions under a shared human rhythm. Life on the road was a constant negotiation between risk and reward, between isolation and the camaraderie of fellow travelers. And this delicate balance created stories of heroism, tragedy, and serendipity that still fascinate researchers today. Some suggest that the roads themselves were teachers, imparting lessons in patience, negotiation, and humility, while others see them as stages upon which the human desire for connection played out in its most raw and unfiltered form. As we follow these invisible routes, we sense both the enormity of the landscapes traversed and the intimacy of human experience, hands roughened by rope and reins, eyes scanning horizons for danger, hearts weighed with longing for distant homes. And yet, for all we know of these travelers, countless stories remain untold, hidden in lost diaries, fragmented letters, and unexcavated ruins, whispering that the Silk Road still holds secrets, waiting for those willing to listen and follow its winding path. From the travelers themselves, we now turn to the marketplaces that served as the beating hearts of Silk Road cities, where every corner hums with life, color, and sound, a sensory overload that spoke of wealth, curiosity, and the ever-present pulse of exchange. Picture the dusty streets of Samarkand or Kashgar, where merchants lay out bolts of silk shimmering like liquid light, spices stacked in pyramids whose scents mingle into an intoxicating perfume, and pottery painted with intricate patterns catches the sun in fleeting glimmers. Here, languages collided and blended, from Sogdian to Chinese, Persian to Arabic, creating a polyphonic chorus that both confused and enchanted travelers. Some scholars believe these marketplaces were more than economic centers. They were living classrooms where knowledge, religion, and technology crossed borders as easily as silver coins changed hands. Others suggest that the social dynamics of trade dictated the political and cultural evolution of entire regions. As alliances were formed, rivalries settled, and cultural hierarchies subtly reinforced through negotiation, rituals, and gift exchanges. Music and performance were never far away. Street musicians, acrobats, and storytellers drew crowds, each performance a thread connecting local traditions to distant influences, a living tapestry woven from movement, sound, and imagination. Consider the smell of roasting meats mingling with the earthy aroma of raw hides and the faint metallic temps of coinage, or the rough textures of camel hair rugs, soft silks, and carved wooden boxes under calloused hands, every detail a fragment of a larger, almost overwhelming experience. It was a place of risk as much as reward. Pickpockets, con artists, and political spies lurked amidst the throngs, reminding us that the flow of goods and ideas was never entirely safe or predictable. Religious and cultural rituals were embedded within commerce. Temple courtyards served as meeting spaces, and festivals timed with trading seasons became landmarks of social memory. Even the architecture, the arches, and caravanserai was designed to facilitate movement, commerce, and the subtle assertion of power, blending functionality with artistry in a way that still inspires architects today. Some researchers note that marketplaces were also arenas where innovation emerged, from new methods of accounting to early forms of banking, while others see them as mirrors reflecting the broader anxieties and aspirations of connected civilizations. And yet, for all the bustle and vibrancy, whispers of lost goods, vanished caravans, and forgotten deals linger in the shadows, leaving us to wonder what mysteries were traded in the quiet moments between bargains. What ideas flickered briefly and then vanished, leaving only traces in the dust of these ancient streets. As night falls over the Silk Road, the caravanserais come alive with a quieter, more contemplative energy, where weary travelers rest beneath wooden beams and lanterns cast a warm, flickering glow across rough stone floors. Imagine the smell of wood smoke mingling with the faint perfume of spices carried in burlap sacks, the soft shuffle of tired feet, and the low hum of distant conversations in languages that seem both familiar and alien. Some historians suggest that these overnight stops were more than simple lodging. They were crucibles of knowledge, places where travelers shared maps, astronomical observations, medical remedies, and stories of distant lands, often over a steaming bowl of porridge or a cup of tea so bitter it woke every nerve. Others propose that caravanserais acted as informal intelligence networks, where merchants and envoys exchanged coded information about political shifts, trade opportunities, or even threats from bandits and rival empires. The architecture itself enclosed courtyards with high walls, arched entryways, and stables lining the perimeter balanced safety with social interaction, creating spaces where people could both retreat and connect. Nighttime often brought storytelling, tales of lost cities swallowed by desert sands, of hidden treasures buried beneath crumbling temples, of merchants whose lives vanished in a single storm, leaving only whispers in the wind. Some researchers believe that these narratives carried coded lessons about morality, survival, and cultural norms, passed along as oral traditions that subtly shaped the ethos of Silk Road society. In the flickering shadows, one might hear the faint scrape of a distant camel or the rustle of silk sheets as travelers adjusted for comfort, each sound a reminder of movement, connection, and the tenuous threads that bound disparate worlds together. The communal meals served in these spaces often reflected the melting pot of cultures on the road: rice from the East, dried fruits from Central Asia, cured meats from the Mediterranean, all seasoned with a blend of spices that told stories of oceans and mountains traversed. Yet, amid the warmth and camaraderie, there remained an ever-present tension, for danger never slept. Sandstorms could bury a caravan overnight, bandits could strike with little warning, and illness could spread silently, erasing entire groups in days. These vulnerabilities underscored the fragile beauty of Silk Road life, where trust, preparation, and knowledge were as valuable as gold. And as travelers drifted to sleep, lulled by the rhythmic breathing of animals and companions alike, they carried with them fragments of other worlds, seeds of ideas, and whispers of civilizations yet unseen, leaving us to ponder what dreams and visions were exchanged under the same stars that watched over deserts and mountains alike, silently witnessing the human endeavor to connect, survive, and remember as the Silk Road stretches across vast deserts, jagged mountain ranges, and endless steppes, one begins to sense the immensity of the human ambition it embodies. A network not merely of trade, but of ideas, faiths, and visions that defied geography itself. Imagine standing on a high pass in the Tian Shan Mountains, the wind biting at your cheeks, the horizon stretching endlessly, and realizing that centuries ago, caravans of camels, laden with silk, spices, and gold, navigated these same paths, guided only by stars, seasonal knowledge, and oral instructions passed down through generations. Some scholars argue that the true marvel of the Silk Road was not the goods it carried, but the intangible currents of influence, astronomy, literature, and religious philosophies that flowed invisibly alongside tangible cargo, shaping civilizations in ways far more profound than commerce alone. Others suggest that this interweaving of cultures produced not only innovation but a subtle resilience, a shared understanding that survival depended on cooperation, tolerance, and the careful negotiation of difference. Consider the manuscripts preserved in the caves of Dunhuang. Their fragile pages etched with scripts in dozens of languages, carrying prayers, stories, and administrative records, evidence of a world where borders were permeable and knowledge was mobile. Even today, researchers continue to uncover hidden connections, noting how Buddhist iconography traveled from India to China, influencing local artistic traditions, or how Persian astronomical techniques appeared in Arabic texts that would later shape European science. The physical landscapes themselves, harsh deserts, icy passes, and fertile oases, acted as both obstacle and teacher, forcing travelers to adapt, innovate, and share crucial survival strategies, reinforcing bonds that transcended tribal or ethnic divisions. Alongside these achievements, there lingered ever-present risks, sandstorms that could erase entire caravans from memory, political upheavals that turned allies into enemies, and diseases that spread silently along trade routes, reminding all who journeyed that fortune was fleeting and life fragile. Yet, in that precarious balance, there was also a remarkable beauty, the realization that disparate cultures, separated by thousands of miles, could intersect in fleeting moments of understanding, commerce, and creativity, leaving behind legacies far greater than any single empire or dynasty. And as modern historians piece together these fragments, digitizing manuscripts, mapping caravan routes, and interpreting faded inscriptions, one cannot help but feel that the Silk Road was more than a series of paths. It was a living organism, breathing through the minds, dreams, and ambitions of countless travelers, scholars, and visionaries, whispering across time to remind us that connection, curiosity, and courage have always been humanity's most enduring currency. And now, as we reach the final stretch of our journey through the Silk Road, take a moment to let the immensity of it all settle in the countless footsteps, the caravans winding like threads across deserts and mountains, the fleeting conversations in markets echoing with a dozen languages, the fragile manuscripts preserved in hidden caves, all converging to form a network that was at once tangible and ethereal. Sit back, relax, and imagine the sunsets over the Taklamakan desert, painting the dunes in deep crimson and gold while merchants paused to rest, their camels kneeling in the cool evening sand, the distant mountains standing as silent witnesses to the movement of history. Some researchers suggest that the Silk Road's greatest gift was its demonstration of humanity's capacity for connection across difference, a lesson that resonates profoundly today. Others point to the exchange of disease, war, and greed as reminders that even the most wondrous networks carry shadows alongside light. Consider the oases that punctuated these vast expanses, fertile pockets where water, shade, and food allowed life to flourish, where scholars debated philosophy. Traders exchanged not only goods but ideas, and artisans experimented with techniques carried from lands far beyond their own. The wind would carry the scent of spices from India, incense from Arabia, and silks from China, weaving a tapestry of culture that was invisible yet deeply felt. A sensory reminder that borders are ultimately human constructs, and that the true currency of the Silk Road was trust, curiosity, and ingenuity. Religious institutions, too, played their part. Buddhist monasteries, Islamic madrasas, and Christian enclaves preserving sacred knowledge while acting as way stations for travelers, their walls echoing with chants, prayers, and teachings that connected present generations to the ancient past. Modern scholarship continues to uncover the stories hidden in these corridors of history, employing digital technologies to map ancient routes, reconstruct lost cities, and bring distant civilizations into dialogue with one another once more, bridging gaps that were thought insurmountable. And yet, for all our tools and knowledge, much remains shrouded in mystery, the identities of countless traders whose names are lost, the precise goods carried on particular journeys, the unrecorded conversations that shaped minds and inspired revolutions. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Silk Road is its reminder that history is not static but alive, a continuous interplay of movement, exchange, and transformation. As we close this journey, the echo of camel hooves on desert sands, the flutter of silk in desert winds, and the whisper of centuries past remind us that the Silk Road was never merely a trade route. It was a testament to humanity's enduring desire to connect, explore, and understand, a legacy that continues to inspire wonder, curiosity, and the pursuit of knowledge even today, leaving us to wonder what new paths of connection we might forge in the centuries yet to come.